"You're just a nanny. Stop pretending you're one of us." My mom scoffed loudly at the gala. "Don't embarrass me in front of my friends." She didn't know the event was sponsored by the parenting app I founded. With my face plastered on every banner, I 41 female had the wildest, most surreal full circle moment recently, and it cracked open some deep old wounds around family, identity, and respect. My mom, 66 female, has always dismissed me, undermined me, and basically never saw me as worthy. She spent most of my life making sure I knew I was less than, not polished enough, not obedient enough, not her. At this high-profile gala in Chicago last year, which she somehow attended without realizing I was the keynote speaker and sponsor, she confronted me in front of everyone, mocking me like I was still a teenager in her living room. What she didn't realize, my face was on every single banner in the venue. The event was funded by the parenting app I built from scratch after escaping her household. "I don't know who told you this was open to plus ones, Elena," my mother said, cocking her head in that all-too-familiar, patronizing tilt as she stood just inches away from me at the gala entrance. "But this is not the kind of event where you tag along." I didn't reply right away. Her voice still carried the same icy sharpness I remembered from childhood, like her words were dipped in perfume and poison. She glanced toward a group of women nearby in sequin dresses, giving them a performative laugh as if to say, "Can you believe this?" Then she leaned in slightly, her voice lowered to a hiss that only I could hear. "Don't embarrass me in front of my friends. You're just a nanny. Stop pretending you're one of us." I took a slow breath, my name badge, which clearly stated Elena Whitaker, founder and CEO, NestleNet, hanging from a silk ribbon around my neck. All around us were glossy posters bearing my headshot and mission statement. I let her stand there, clueless, basking in her own condescension. I smiled politely, nodded at the event coordinator who had just walked over to escort me to the stage, and said to her, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Let's not keep the audience waiting. They're expecting me." Her face didn't crumble immediately. My mother wasn't someone who allowed herself to be visibly rattled, but I saw it, the tiny tremor at the corner of her mouth. The way her eyes darted to the banner above the ballroom doors where my picture stood 3 feet tall, beside the words, "Empowering Parents, Elevating Caregivers, NestleNet founder, Elena Whitaker." I suppose to really understand why that moment mattered, you need to know what it took to get there, and what kind of woman she is. Growing up in Evanston, Illinois, the wrong look could be a scandal. The wrong expression at the dinner table could earn you a cold shoulder for days. My mother, Corinne, came from old money, though she worked very hard to give the impression it was self-made. She ran our house like a showroom. Everything and everyone had to be in its place, including me. My father, Gerald, was a gentle man. Quiet, thoughtful, an English professor at Northwestern who loved poetry and grilled cheese sandwiches. He left when I was 8. There was no big explosion, not in front of me, but one morning I came downstairs and his suit jackets were gone. I never got the full story, but years later I found out he moved to Vermont and started a small bookstore. Corinne told anyone who'd listen that he was weak and ran off with some librarian. I think the truth is he just couldn't live in her shadow anymore, and maybe he knew he couldn't protect me from her. After he left, things got colder. She didn't believe in therapy. She believed in appearances, posture, and achievement. I was enrolled in ballet, violin, etiquette classes, but none of it stuck because I didn't care about those things. I loved computers. I loved books. I loved people who felt real. The only warmth in my childhood came from Rosa. Rosa was our live-in nanny, though that word doesn't begin to describe what she was to me. She was my comfort, my guide, my soft place to fall. She taught me Spanish when I was little, slipped chocolate into my backpack when I had exams, and hummed lullabies when I cried myself to sleep. She had 3 kids of her own back in Guatemala, and I sometimes wondered if I reminded her of them. My mother treated Rosa like she was part of the furniture. She never once asked about her life, never even said thank you. But I loved her, and when I left for college, it felt like I was leaving Rosa behind more than anything else. Corinne didn't come to my high school graduation. She said I didn't deserve a celebration for just doing what was expected. I went to Stanford on a partial scholarship, majoring in computer science. It was the first time in my life I could breathe without tiptoeing. I made friends, learned how to code, and fell in love with designing systems that helped people. By my junior year, I met Nikhil, a grad student from Mumbai with a gentle demeanor and a love for logic puzzles. We got married 3 years later, moved to San Francisco, and had our daughter Zoe when I was 27. It felt like a fresh start, one I had carved out myself. But real life doesn't always follow a clean arc. When Zoe was 4, she started having seizures. The diagnosis, Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, knocked the air out of us. It's rare, severe, and changes everything. I left my job. Nikhil did too for a while, but he struggled. We drifted, argued, and broke. He moved back east to take a job. I stayed because Zoe needed consistency, and she needed me. It was in those long, hopeless nights in hospital waiting rooms, trying to balance work and medical care and emotional survival, that NestleNet was born. It didn't start with big plans. I just wanted to connect with other parents like me, those juggling caregiving and careers, looking for nannies who understood chronic illness, those who didn't have extended family or wealthy safety nets. I wanted to build the thing I needed. Over time, it grew. I learned how to pitch, how to network, how to explain why this mattered. Investors said it was too niche at first. Then pandemic-era demand for in-home care and remote community resources skyrocketed. By 2021, we had 1 million users. I had a staff, I had a mission. And yet, not one word from my mother. She didn't call when Zoe was hospitalized, not when Nikhil and I split, not even when a feature on me ran in Fast Company. She didn't know I was a CEO. She still assumed I was babysitting or working with kids. I didn't correct her. I didn't owe her that anymore. So when NestleNet was asked to sponsor a parenting and caregiving tech gala in Chicago, I hesitated. Going back to that city meant walking into old ghosts, but something inside me said yes. The event was everything I hoped it would be. We funded booths for underfunded caregiving nonprofits. We honored single mothers, elder caregivers, and immigrant nannies. I gave the keynote speech. I shared my journey, not for applause, but for the silent nods in the back of the room from people who finally felt seen. That's when my mother showed up. She had no idea I was the one behind it all. I guess one of her country club friends dragged her along, thinking it was just another excuse to drink wine and show off a new clutch. She walked into that gala with her chin high and her assumptions even higher. And when she saw me near the check-in table, not as a guest, but as the host, she didn't skip a beat. "Don't embarrass me," she said. "You're just a nanny." At that moment, I realized something important. People like her, who reduce others to status and image, they live in a tiny, suffocating world. I don't. I didn't say much to her. I didn't need to. I let the room, the stage, the banners, the speeches speak for me. But that night cracked something open I hadn't touched in years. I sat in my hotel room after the gala, staring out at the city skyline, and thought about all the women who raised me. Rosa, the nurses who cared for Zoe, the friends who showed up without judgment, the users on our app who built something with me. That's my family now. Corinne didn't stay for the speech. She left before dinner, probably too humiliated to sit in a room where her daughter, the one she thought was nothing, was being honored. She hasn't contacted me since, and I think I'm okay with that. I didn't expect the floodgates that night would open up the way they did. I'd told myself for years that my mother's opinion no longer mattered, that I'd long since outgrown the need for her approval. But sitting alone in that high-rise hotel suite, with the buzz of the gala still vibrating through my body and the memory of her sneer still echoing in my ears, I realized I wasn't as immune as I thought. What hurt wasn't her cruelty, I was used to that. What stung was how easy it still was for her to reduce me, with a single sentence, back to the insecure girl she'd always seen me as. "You're just a nanny." As if that was an insult. As if Rosa hadn't done more parenting in a day than my mother had in a year. As if nanny meant small, invisible, unimportant. It was so her to underestimate not just me, but everyone who had ever helped raise me. That night, I didn't sleep much. I ordered a chamomile tea from room service, let it go cold, then pulled out my laptop and logged into NestleNet's admin dashboard. There were already thank you messages pouring in from attendees, many from people I'd never met. One, from a woman named Thalia in Indiana, hit me square in the chest. My mom always told me I was just a babysitter, while I was working 3 jobs and putting myself through school. Tonight, hearing your story made me feel something I haven't felt in a long time: seen. Thank you for making this space, for all of us. I stared at the message, reread it twice, and then cried the kind of quiet, shaking cry that you don't even realize is happening until your shirt is soaked. I thought about replying. I didn't, not right away, but I bookmarked the message. The next morning, I checked out early and drove to Evanston. I hadn't been back in years. The streets were too familiar. The coffee shop on Dempster still had the same chipped wooden tables. The neighborhood library still had the old brick facade and the worn steps out front where I used to sit and read because I didn't want to go home yet. Driving past our old house, I slowed instinctively. The shutters had been painted, and a newer SUV sat in the driveway. I knew she'd sold it a few years back, downsizing to a condo near the lake. Still, seeing someone else's curtains in the windows made something tight unwind in my chest. I didn't visit her. I didn't even consider it. But I did stop at the cemetery. Rosa had passed 2 years prior, peacefully in her sleep in a hospice just outside San Jose. I was there, holding her hand. Zoe had kissed her forehead and whispered, "Gracias por cuidarme siempre." Thank you for always taking care of me. I visited her grave every time I came back to Illinois. This time, I sat down in the damp grass, the late autumn wind tugging at the ends of my coat. I told her about the gala, about Corinne's face when she realized the truth, about the speech, the applause, the woman from Indiana. I didn't need her to be proud of me, she always had been, but it still helped to say it out loud. After an hour, I headed to my rental car just as my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. That was not the time or place for a confrontation. You humiliated me. Corinne, of course. No apology, no curiosity, just blame. I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the screen. I started typing. You did that to yourself. Then deleted it. Instead, I turned the phone off and dropped it in my bag. A few days later, back in San Francisco, I returned to my usual rhythm, school drop-offs, founder meetings, product updates. But something was off, a gnawing feeling. My team had noticed too. You okay? My CTO, Neera, asked me in our Monday stand-up. I'm good, I said, just thinking about ways we could do more for caregivers. Especially immigrant workers. I think it's time we expand the support programs. I expected a nod. Instead, Neera smiled, a knowing one. We've been waiting for you to say that. Apparently, while I'd been in Chicago, they'd been brainstorming internally. A few had spoken with community orgs, others had mapped potential grant partnerships. It was time to build something bigger than the app. A foundation. We called it Rosa's Way. Grants for low-income caregivers pursuing education. Emergency support stipends. Free access to legal aid for undocumented nannies. Mental health support. All the things I knew Rosa would have needed, and so many of the women like her still did. We launched the initiative on Mother's Day the following year. I didn't invite my mother, but Zoe gave the opening remarks. She stood in front of a crowd of over 500 people, board members, families, city officials, and spoke from her heart about what it meant to be raised not just by a mother, but by women who chose to love her, even when they didn't have to. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Afterward, an elderly woman came up to me in the hallway. Spanish accent, calloused hands, a quiet dignity. She didn't say much. Just took my hand and whispered, "Gracias, mija." That night, I finally wrote back to Thalia in Indiana. You're not just anything. You are exactly who this world needs more of. Thank you for seeing me. I see you too. I signed it simply. Elena, founder, daughter, and proud nanny's girl. A few months passed, and I found myself living more boldly than I had in years. Not because I was chasing revenge, but because I had finally stepped out from under the long shadow of needing validation from someone who never intended to give it. That didn't mean the past was erased. Wounds like that don't vanish. They harden into scars, but even those can ache when the weather turns. Corinne didn't reach out again after her brief, bitter text. But her silence wasn't the kind that felt peaceful. It was the kind that crackled, waiting for something. And then something came. In late fall, I was invited to speak at an exclusive Women in Tech Summit hosted by Northwestern University. The keynote panel included venture capitalists, founders, and academics, mostly women, many from deeply traditional families, a few of whom I knew had ties to my mother's circle. The theme? Breaking barriers. Rewriting the legacy of power. Very on brand for my life. I agreed to do it. But this time, I wanted to do more than speak. I wanted to make something clear to everyone who had ever stood by while people like Rosa were dismissed. The night of the summit, I wore a charcoal gray pantsuit, simple, sleek, and unapologetically not ladylike, in the way my mother had once defined it. Zoe was with me, now 14, sharper than ever and already talking about launching her own startup one day. Before the event began, the moderator pulled me aside. We had some last-minute ticket requests. One name might surprise you, Corinne Whittaker. I paused. She's here. The moderator raised an eyebrow. She is, sitting third row, far right. Designer scarf, zero humility. I nearly laughed. Of course. She'd found a way in. She'd heard whispers. She couldn't resist the chance to reclaim the narrative, or at least make sure no one had taken it from her. But this time, she had no idea what was coming. When the panel began, I stuck to the script at first. I spoke about bias in venture funding, the invisibility of care work in economic models, and the app's next chapter. The room was warm, receptive. Then the moderator asked, "Who was the first woman in your life who taught you what real strength looks like?" And I saw her, Corinne, sitting up a little straighter, probably expecting to be mentioned. Probably expecting me to soften, finally, but I didn't flinch. My mother's house was beautiful. Polished floors, crystal chandeliers, not a single photo frame out of place. She taught me how to keep up appearances, I began. The room was quiet, but the woman who taught me strength was Rosa, our nanny. She came from Guatemala with nothing, raised 3 children while raising me 2, and did it with dignity no one ever honored. I felt Corinne's stare. She held my hand when my father left. She read to me when my mother was too busy. She helped me become the kind of mother I never saw growing up. The audience clapped, soft at first, then louder. She passed away 2 years ago. Her name isn't on any family tree, but I named a foundation after her, Rosa's Way. And this fall, we gave our first 20 scholarships to young women training to be caretakers. I didn't look at Corinne again. I didn't need to. Because now the room knew. The legacy I honored wasn't hers. After the panel, people lined up to speak with me, students, professors, donors. One of them, a senior board member of a major women's investment firm, introduced herself and handed me her card. "We're moving serious funds into caregiver tech. You're on our radar now, Elena." As the crowd thinned, I finally spotted Corinne slipping quietly out the back, a flicker of something unreadable on her face. Not rage, no shame. Something closer to resignation. She hadn't gotten her moment, and I didn't need her to. That winter, Zoe and I spent the holidays with Rosa's family in San Jose. Her eldest granddaughter, Camilla, was graduating from UC Berkeley, the first in the family to go to college. Her scholarship had come from Rosa's Way. On New Year's Eve, we lit candles in Rosa's memory, laughed, sang old lullabies, shared tamales and stories. I thought about Corinne, probably alone, probably still sculpting a version of herself she could stand to look at. And for the first time in my life, I didn't pity her. I didn't hate her. I just didn't need her. That was my revenge, not success, freedom.